It's EcoDarius. My name is Daria. How many of us know what's happening outside our cities, regions, and countries? How many of us are aware of violent attacks on environmental defenders and eco-activists? How many of us follow the ongoing environmental conflicts across the globe? Fighting to protect land, flora and fauna became so dangerous in the recent years. In 2018 alone, 164 killings of environmental defenders were documented by Global Witness. The Global Atlas of Environmental Justice reported 3,213 cases so far, including violent attacks, death threats, lawsuits, and arrests. Stories in this movie illustrate the scale of the problem. You will hear 10 voices from 10 people who will tell you about 10 ongoing environmental conflicts that's happening right now in their homelands. We hope you understand how much pressure they will receive because subject is very uncomfortable for governments and businesses. Please show them your support and comprehension.
Thoothukudi is extremely famous for pearls. It's a great exporter. It has a number of wonderful churches which have been established by people from across the world who've come there, traveled, who've loved the place, and it's a beautiful place. It has a lot of places. It's a very developed space. It's not one of those villages or anything of that kind. So if this is Thoothukudi district, there's always a fringe, right? In all cities, it's the fringes where industries will be allowed to build spaces. There are so many such industries in that belt, but obviously there are people employed in these industries. So where do they live? They start building small hamlets around the industries, and so residential belts started forming. About 50, 80 years ago, these villages didn't exist. It was just empty lands. Sterlite has stood out as it's the largest factory in that place, and it's the most well-known industry. Sterlite is one of the largest copper smelter plants in the world. The production that they do for various countries, the exports, they are massive. It's not just a tiny industry in Thoothukudi. It's a world name. It's a global name. Sterlite strongly believes that they have an extremely efficient effluent system. There is very, very, very minimal carbon emission, very minimal pollutants getting out of their factory. Yeah, so in these belts, if people look around anywhere, they can only see the Sterlite factory chimneys all around because it's a huge factory. Sterlite is thousands and thousands of square feet. So wherever you turn around, you can see the chimney or something about Sterlite from there, right? So what is the first thing that they see? Sterlite. A lot of people started developing cancer symptoms, breathing difficulties. Almost every street had a cancer patient or breathing difficulty, and that's not normal. You can't just say, you know what, it's just coincidence that they all have cancer. And there was this guy said, okay, fine, if I have cancer, they can say maybe you smoked or you drank. My 4-year-old child has cancer, will you say the same? See, again, if this is a coincidence or not is a different thing. But there has to be a study to look into that, and that's not been there. So that's when the villagers thought, you know what, enough is enough. Let's take matter into our own hands. Let's do something about it. Government never considered this a top priority to be actually taking this up. And that's when people thought, you know what, let's do something about it. And they marched to the collectorate. So they came every day with a petition to give it to the with a petition near the collectorate, and they would hold that, sit there in protest. There'll be 200 people, 250 people, sometimes 150 people, just sitting and saying, you know what, please shut down Sterlite. This went on for 100 days. On the 100th day, about, I think, 30 to 50,000 people decide to march to the collectorate and give him the petition saying, you know what, shut down Sterlite. This is 50,000, not just men or women. Men, women, children, babies, very old men were walking in with a stick. They were walking towards the collectorate, and they told, the officials told that there was no collector was not in town. So these guys said that was not okay, because they have a strong feeling he would be there. And obviously the cops knew beforehand they were going, because it was a 100-day protest, so all of us were aware. Suddenly they realize, they see that on tops of all the police vans there are sniper guns and men standing with guns. And the people are wondering what even is happening. My mother had told her 17-year-old daughter, who had just passed her 12th grade examination of school, and she'd got brilliant marks, and she was either going to become a doctor or a lawyer because she had enough marks. So they're very, very, very poor people. And she was going to become a lawyer, and she decided. She was standing there and saying, no, no, Sterlite, and a bullet just went through the back of her skull and came out of her mouth. And she was holding the hand of her 3-year-old or 2-year-old cousin. And she drops there, her mother, everyone's watching. So the mother asked me if I was going there to create a big fight or a ruckus, why would I take my 17-year-old daughter or like a 3-year-old child? I wouldn't, right? I would go maybe. I wouldn't be taking them. It's the most common logic. There is no argument here. I think 13 people were killed and several were injured. So imagine, I'm saying 13 killed, several others had gunshot wounds all over. And before they know, the entire place, people were crying, and there were kids who'd lost their parents, and it was really, really sad. The government had shut down the internet completely. People were really angry. They started taking pictures of the man who is in a yellow shirt sitting on top of the police van and shooting. And this guy was not even in his police uniform. But he is a cop, obviously. By the Indian law, you can use ammunition if a certain situation goes out of control. But it's a very, very strict rule that you should as much avoid hitting anyone above the waist. In fact, it's only below the knees that you can possibly hit, whether it's a lathi, which is a stick, a baton, or whatever be it. And shooting someone is just, especially civilians, is not all right. It's just not all right. There's a lot of fishing hamlets in Thoothukudi, okay? So a lot of people who were participating in this were also from the fishing hamlet. And a lot of them are converted Christians. So this whole converted Christianity is also very sensitive dynamic in the area. And a lot of people, these anti-social elements, try to pin the blame on these people. But what was wonderful to see was the rest of Thoothukudi did not let that happen. They stood by it. They said, no, you can't just discriminate them based on caste, because cancer has hit us all, whether we're Christian or transgender or whatever be it. I came back and I went back to the place 1 month later. And so when I went the next time, I wanted to basically understand why Sterlite. Because when I went to the villages, I went to all the villages, I realized there were so many industries. In fact, out of 1 or 2 industries, I've seen like effluents, like visibly on the main road. And I'm wondering why none of these names are featured in any of their dialogues or any of their interviews to me. And at that time, the dynamics had changed. Now what happened was, many of them said, the police had come and picked up the men in the village, a lot of men in the village, and put them in forced lockup in their station jails. They were returned after a couple of days, and some of them were hit also. And they were returned because some of them said they were trying to pin the blame on us, saying that you guys were the ones who caused the chaos. Sterlite has been a source of a lot of employment, whatever you say, because like I tell you, it's a huge factory. Say other factories might employ 100 or 200 people. Here we have hundreds and hundreds of people are being employed. And why did these villages come up in the first place? Because of employment at Sterlite. So because they get employed, then they start living there. There are quarters, the company quarters, but then not everyone, there are lots of layers, right, of laborers. And there are contractors. So many of them work for a certain period and the contract is renewed, and this goes on happening. And so a lot of people wanted to protest, but they say that it's their bread and butter. So they were at this crossroads. So that's why there were a lot of women and mothers and children protesting. There were men, but there were a lot of women. And why women was because they were really concerned about the safety of their own lives and the future generations. Because there were a couple of people who said they've had 5 abortions. And the doctor has no reason. The doctor says that, you know what, we've had a couple of women from this particular belt who've had these issues. So to all these villages, I went back and asked, okay, why Sterlite? Tell me why. There was this study that happened. They didn't really have a clear answer. They didn't. And that is what surprised me, because Sterlite says they did this and that. And there are a lot of industries. So, very honestly speaking, after I spoke to a lot of, if so many industries are in a particular belt, it's bound to be so polluted. It's bound to have huge pollution levels, especially when there is not a regular check by a government body. My question was, it's obvious. First of all, that's extremely hazardous for humans to live in that area. Even for people to work in those factories, it is because it's too many factories, right? So if it's concentration, only if all these factories have adopted amazing green, environment-friendly techniques, then probably you can reduce the emission. That's what I asked them. So, okay, why are you not blaming the rest of them? They said, oh, we don't know. This is the biggest, so we feel maybe they're responsible. And I said, okay, but they said, see, it's the government's job to look into it, to do a survey, to study. The government didn't do it. They did once, and after that so much has still happened. So let them find the cause, which is exactly my question to the government as well. Sterlite was shut down because it's not sealed. It's shut down for now. So it's in limbo. And they had even got a green signal for expansion to become the largest copper smelter plant in the country or the world, I think, just a week or 2 before this whole incident. And so when I asked a couple of officials, why haven't you done a cumulative research on that area to find out the causes for these diseases, for these illnesses? Fine, if it's not Sterlite, then who? And right now there are other issues happening, so it's all getting diluted, and people think they're safe because the industry is shut down. But you never know if what really caused that in the first place. Was it a cumulative effect? Was it one person, or was it just the copper? Then this was given to the CBI and they started investigating. Now it's been what, 2.5 years since this has happened, and about September 2019 they gave a report saying that everything is going as per on track. One is about looking into the police killings. Two is about whether the anti-social elements did anything about it. But there is no study happening on the environmental impact in that area. There's no environmental assessment happening. And when I spoke to several environmentalists who are very, very loud about it, even they said they haven't done anything about it. Now again, Sterlite will file a couple more. They had filed petitions asking for renewal, and they had also asked saying, give us reasons why. Because they obviously have a lot of research teams, but that doesn't work, right? What they do. But they really try to build their image again. They try to talk to people. They try to have a lot of community engagement programs. It has to come from the government. Until then, people won't believe it.
Bosawás representa el 14% del territorio nicaragüense y posee alrededor de 2.2 millones de hectáreas y forma parte del corredor biológico mesoamericano que garantiza la libre circulación de vida silvestre entre Belice, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panamá y México. Es la capacidad que tienen los animales de poder recorrer el territorio. Entonces, Bosawás forma parte del corredor biológico mesoamericano, que se extiende desde México hasta Panamá. La reserva de Bosawás fue declarada una reserva de biosfera por la UNESCO en 1997. En Bosawás viven dos comunidades indígenas. Existen varias comunidades indígenas dentro de la reserva de Bosawás. La comunidad mayagna es la comunidad indígena mayoritaria. También la reserva es poblada por la comunidad misquita. La comunidad misquita, su nombre proviene de la mosquitia. La mosquitia era el nombre que tiene la costa este de Nicaragua, que es tocada por el Océano Atlántico. La comunidad misquita está asentada al norte de Bosawás y la comunidad mayagna se asentó en el centro o el núcleo de la reserva. Después del inicio del conflicto en Bosawás, es importante recordar el inicio de la concesión a los territorios del Estado de Nicaragua a las comunidades indígenas. El inicio del conflicto es alrededor de los años 1600, más o menos. Para hablar del inicio del conflicto se tiene que retomar la colonización que hubo en la costa atlántica de Nicaragua por parte de países europeos. Ha habido un conflicto donde siempre se ha dejado a las comunidades indígenas de lado, no se ha tomado en cuenta y su forma de organización y vida ha sido totalmente lastimada, casi llevada al punto de la extinción. La principal problemática que tiene Bosawás proviene de la migración, que son personas de Occidente o del centro de Nicaragua que invaden Bosawás. Se trasladan a esta región en busca de tierras y espacios fértiles para criar ganado o para producir sus tierras. También, entonces, a esto se le llama el avance de la frontera agrícola y que ha causado el aumento de la actividad ganadera. Además, la especulación con el uso de tierras en la zona, la tala ilegal, así como la tala legal, son las principales problemáticas que tiene Bosawás. Las comunidades indígenas están muy bien organizadas. Los líderes indígenas se esfuerzan mucho para que su población no participe de este daño a la reserva. Realmente quienes están vendiendo y traficando estas tierras son personas que se han asentado, que han llegado a vivir a la reserva hace mucho tiempo. Realmente quienes están vendiendo estos terrenos no pertenecen a las comunidades indígenas. Pero sin embargo, muchas comunidades indígenas han sido desplazadas por la amenaza de estos colonos, que son las personas invasoras. Y entonces ha habido presiones y amenazas para entregar ciertas tierras. Que las comunidades indígenas, algunas han sido obligadas a entregar parte de su territorio y a llegar a acuerdos con estos colonos. Entonces existe la confusión de que los indígenas son los malos, pero es cuando realmente han sido los invasores. Desde hace años, el gobierno nicaragüense, diferentes gobiernos, pero principalmente el actual, ha entregado concesiones mineras a grandes empresas internacionales que han dañado los suelos y que han irrumpido dentro de las comunidades indígenas. La organización, el ministerio encargado de dar estos permisos y estas concesiones es el Ministerio de Ambiente y Recursos Naturales, que se llama Marena. Y además las alcaldías municipales. Existen leyes que les permiten a las empresas realizar esta extracción de oro, que muchas veces no cumple con los estándares internacionales y que dañan el medio ambiente. Las comunidades son muy poco consultadas y los gobiernos locales, así como los gobiernos indígenas, básicamente sienten que estos proyectos han sido impuestos y jamás reciben ningún tipo de consulta y son quienes menos beneficios tienen. Todos los años mueren líderes y comunitarios indígenas, todos los años. Y todos los años cientos de indígenas son desplazados hacia Honduras o hacia fuera de la reserva debido a las amenazas y ataques que tienen por parte de los colonos, que muchas veces estos ataques son impulsados por personas políticas de la zona que son corruptos y por empresarios que quieren extender sus territorios, obtener más tierras, o incluso por personas que simplemente tienen la necesidad de un lugar donde vivir.
Ataque armado contra indígenas en la reserva de biosfera Bosawás deja 6 muertos y al menos 10 desaparecidos. Autoridades del gobierno territorial señalan que el ataque fue ejecutado la tarde del miércoles por colonos armados que, además de atacar a los indígenas, incendiaron sus viviendas. Los detalles con nuestra periodista Jocelyn Ro.
La noche del 29 de enero y la madrugada del 30 de enero, ese día, un grupo de 80 hombres armados invadió una comunidad en el gobierno territorial Mayagna y asesinaron a 6 indígenas y secuestraron a otros 10, destruyendo su comunidad y asesinando a todos los animales de crianza que tenían. Sabemos que son invasores, colonos, pero realmente la policía no ahondó en las investigaciones, más bien minimizó los hechos. Publicaron una nota de prensa donde reconocieron la muerte de estos 2 indígenas, pero no le llamaron indígenas, dieron sus nombres, intentando minimizar el impacto que esto había causado, que este ataque había causado. Por así decirlo, tiene una doble cara frente a la problemática. Frente a las comunidades indígenas y los gobiernos locales, se presenta como alguien que está intentando ayudarles. Desde siempre las comunidades indígenas han estado en contra de este tipo de desarrollo, es decir, la tala, la invasión, la minería. El gobierno, no solo el actual, tienen muchos compromisos con las personas que habitan alrededor de la reserva y con los empresarios. Entonces, por cumplir esas promesas políticas, han descuidado y olvidado todas estas promesas que han hecho a las comunidades indígenas, que, como platicábamos al inicio, nunca realmente han sido reconocidas. Estas comunidades indígenas habitaban estas tierras cientos de años antes de que existiera el Estado nicaragüense. Y después de la colonización y la creación del Estado nicaragüense, han quedado relegados a vivir en la reserva. Pero sus derechos y los acuerdos que se han realizado con las comunidades indígenas han sido rotos. Entonces, esta negligencia estatal por dar seguimiento a estas denuncias normalmente se replica en las otras reservas que hay en Nicaragua. En 2018 hubo un incendio en la segunda reserva más grande del país, que se llama Indio Maíz, provocada también por invasores. Y la negligencia estatal llevó a muchas protestas que luego se convirtieron en el inicio de la crisis sociopolítica que actualmente vivimos en Nicaragua. Mi organización y muchas otras participaron en las convocatorias a estas manifestaciones. Sin embargo, el conflicto escaló y estas organizaciones ambientales fueron las cuales estuvieron en el foco de persecución y represión. Entonces, hay mucho miedo de parte de los jóvenes y de las personas en general nicaragüenses de participar públicamente de una denuncia social. Una de las soluciones, porque en efecto no existe una sola solución, es un cambio y un repensar en el modelo económico y de desarrollo en Nicaragua. Esta solución pasa porque exista una verdadera voluntad política, económica y social para cambiar la forma en que se ha abordado este problema. Es decir, a partir del sector político se necesita la voluntad y la aplicación verdadera de las leyes, y por parte del sector económico se necesita un reconocimiento del daño ambiental que se ha causado y las nuevas formas de desarrollo que pueden haber. Y por parte de este sector social, por así decirlo, es la educación y concientización sobre la problemática, porque realmente la mayoría de nicaragüenses desconoce la problemática en Bosawás. Es decir, 8 de cada 10 personas no sabe lo que está pasando en Bosawás, no tienen ni idea de lo que está pasando. Además de eso, se suma al racismo, al clasismo que hemos venido arrastrando en una cultura política tóxica y totalmente dañina. Entonces, una de las soluciones pues, es repensar del modelo de desarrollo económico y social que tenemos en Nicaragua, que eventualmente, obviamente, va a generar un impacto y un esfuerzo internacional y nacional para poder hacer acciones contundentes que paren esta destrucción. Las personas están activas, están interesadas y constantemente están denunciando a nivel individual lo que está pasando. Y muy seguramente, luego de que logremos sobrepasar esta crisis, habrá una explosión de movimientos sociales en Nicaragua.
So Borneo is unique in a lot of different ways. Firstly, it's often called the richest rainforest in the world, and it actually has more species of plants than the entire continent of Africa. It's also home to many rare and unfortunately now endangered animals such as the Bornean orangutan and the pygmy elephant. Borneo is actually also one of the oldest rainforests in the world, around 130 million years old. And finally, of course, it's home to many indigenous communities. For them, the forest is really like their home. Their whole life just revolves around it. They farm there, they get their food and drinks there, and they live to protect their forest. Deforestation has been such a major issue in Indonesia for decades, and it continues until today. Indonesia has one of the highest deforestation rates in the world, and around 70 to 90% of it is actually illegal. So just to give you a little picture, between 2014 and 2015, every minute, just under 2 FIFA football pitches are lost. And a lot of deforestation is happening in Kalimantan, or also called the Indonesian island of Borneo, and also in Sumatra and parts of Papua as well. So it really started in around the years 1970s and 1980s. At this time, the government was targeting the rainforest primarily to export lumber. Then, usually after the trees are cut down to export lumber, it's fairly standard practice for the companies to burn the remainder of the forest and clear it so they can start planting oil palms, which is the plant to make palm oil. And at the same time, around 1970s and 1980s, the government had transmigration programs where they incentivized millions of people from the overpopulated island of Java and trying to send them over to Borneo. So with this transmigration program, the government needed to cut a lot of the forest down to create houses and urban spaces. And not only was this a problem for deforestation, but it was also a problem for the natives, because when you have so many people coming into your space, the cultures just kind of clash, and the cultures from Java started to dominate as well. So this was both a problem, deforestation, and also cultural imperialism. So the main sources of the deforestation happening in Borneo is definitely from the industries of lumber, palm oil, coal mining, and a couple of mega agricultural projects. So Indonesia is the 6th largest producer of pulp and paper in the world, and it is expected to grow with the global demand. Then we also have palm oil, which is an ingredient in a lot of our items. It's I think not many people know, but yeah, it's basically, if you check in like the back of your packaging, behind like your lipstick, your ice cream, your shampoo, it's really everywhere. And Indonesia is by far the largest producer of palm oil in the world. We account for over 50% of the global production. And finally, we have mining. Kalimantan is actually the heart of Indonesia's coal mining industry. Over half the province is allocated for mining. Well, there are two main effects. The first one is a loss of biodiversity. With the plants, the monoculture palm oil plantations will greatly endanger the plant species and biodiversity, and also the animals, because for a lot of the animals, they need a large block of interconnected forests to survive, such as orangutans and elephants. So if they go extinct, they will break the balance of the ecosystem. And the second main effect is carbon emissions and climate change. So just over a decade ago, actually, Indonesia was the 3rd largest emitter of carbon dioxide in the entire world. And one of the main reasons is deforestation, because it's a combination from a large-scale use of fires for clearing, which is illegal, as well as when you cut the trees, massive amounts of carbon dioxide are released. So the carbon emissions, of course, is a huge contributor to global warming and climate change. And it's particularly sad because Indonesia is very vulnerable to global warming. We are very susceptible to floods, and we have a lot of natural disasters as well, like cyclones and droughts, and this is all worsened by climate change. One of the main environmental defenders is definitely the indigenous tribes, because they play such a huge role in defending their home, the forest. There's actually a recent success story where after 40 years of struggle, the Dayak tribe finally gained rights over their ancestral land, which included 7,500 hectares of rainforest that they can protect. And they achieved this through legal action, but also daily physical monitoring of the land. So no companies can go in, let's say in the middle of the night, and start fires and start illegally deforesting their land. However, this is sadly not always the case. Many times the indigenous tribes are put in a very sad position, like just last month, in June 2020, 2 indigenous farmers got sentenced to jail because they were harvesting in their community land that has been stolen by a palm oil company. So there's many cases like this, sadly, for the indigenous tribes. And on the other side, we also have organizations helping defend the environment, not only, like animal and forest conservation, but also social organizations that are helping fight for the rights of the indigenous tribes, which is very important. Another positive story, actually, 16 orangutans were recently released into their natural habitat in Borneo by the government in partnership with a couple of animal conservation organizations. So it's nice to sometimes celebrate the positive things and not only focus on the negative. Since 2011, actually, the government has a program called the moratorium in place that protects around 65 million hectares of the rainforest and peatlands as well. This is part of a larger agreement with Norway and also part of the UNREDD program, which stands for the United Nations Program on Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation. As part of this program, Norway also pledged to provide Indonesia with up to $1 billion in economic aid. So if Indonesia is meeting their goals in decreasing their deforestation rates, Norway will slowly give parts of the $1 billion. And it's also to compensate because a lot of the economy of Indonesia is still dependent on palm oil and pulp and paper. So if we stop deforestation in general, of course, the economy will also suffer. That's why Norway is giving this economic aid to help. However, the moratorium has many legal loopholes and it has extremely weak enforcement by the government and also high levels of corruption by the local government. So it has been relatively ineffective in stopping or decreasing Indonesia's deforestation. Furthermore, key industries such as mining and rice production are actually exempted from this law. And over the years, the protected area of the moratorium has also been decreasing instead of increasing. For example, every couple of years, they can review the amount of space that is protected by the moratorium. A lot of companies and local governments are using this opportunity to try and lobby and bribe and a bit of corrupt acts to make it decrease so they can still function as the companies and exploit it. Well, overall, the situation currently isn't so great for indigenous tribes and also natives. There's many marginalized and underprivileged communities. Deforestation has really left them with no home, and for others, a loss of access to water and food. The government isn't really doing much to help indigenous tribes. Actually, in 2018, they were discussing a law that would protect the rights of the native populations. However, it was never passed. And then currently, none of the major political parties are showing any interest in protecting the rights of indigenous tribes. These big companies are also still illegally stripping these people from their homes, either usually by giving them bribes, by telling them, I'll give you some money if you leave, or if they don't want to, they would start a fire illegally and take their land through that. It's very, very sad. And on the more legal side, the moratorium, that is the law that protects the rainforest, it might be getting worse if the omnibus law is passed, because the government right now is focusing a lot more on economic output rather than the environment. And in general, the deforestation rates are still very high, and the big corporations are still taking advantage of the little people, and the government are not doing enough to help. On a more personal level, I think we have to be very considerate with our consumption. So first of all, we can start stopping using products that has palm oil in it and reducing paper usage to decrease global demand. And really pay attention to the products you are using. You'll be shocked at how many of them has palm oil in the ingredients. The tricky thing is that palm oil isn't always directly written as palm oil because they have a lot of derivatives. So sometimes they would list it as that instead. And on a more greater scale, the Borneo definitely need large blocks of interconnected forests for the animals, the plants, and the indigenous tribes to survive. So we should really protect these forests. A couple things that we can do is to support organizations that conserve animal and forests, such as WWF, Heart of Borneo, the Boss Foundation. These are a couple of main ones, and as well as protecting indigenous tribes. So we need to really pressure the government, especially on a global scale, so we can, shock them and we can tell them we've had enough and things need to change. The government also needs to have a much stricter and more consistent implementation of the moratorium, as well as looking at illegal forest fires and illegal wildlife trade, because that is still another big thing. And personally, we can start raising awareness to our friends and family, we can sign petitions, and we can join movements as well.
Gomez was an agricultural engineer. He defends Mexican forests. He dedicated his life's work to conservation of the monarch butterfly reserve in the state of Michoacán here in Mexico. He became recognized as most of the important defenders of monarch butterflies in the country. He managed this sanctuary of this reserve named El Rosario, which in the words of Saint Gomez Gonzalez, he was the largest reserve of this species in Mexico. For more of 20 years, Homero Gomez dedicated his work to the conservation of this place and focuses on the efforts of reforestation, and since the monarch butterfly threatened species, since he highlights the importance of the forest as a source of life, and he was activist defender of the nature in Mexico. He was a lawyer, but he realized the importance of the forest because he was studying agricultural engineer, and then he realized that the forests are very important in the life of the species and the humans as well. On January 13 of this year, Homero Gomez was disappeared. It was last seen in the town of El Soldado in municipality of Campo in Michoacán. Michoacán State Human Rights Commission called on the entire authorities intensify the search for the defender of the forest. For 2 weeks after an intense search for the activist was carried on, however, the body of Homero Gomez was found in the 29th of the same month in a water well near the place he were disappeared. The first version of the authorities was he had been accidental death. However, colleagues, family, friends, and civil organizations argued that activist death should be linked to his work as a protector of the forest. In previous months, Gomez Gonzalez was receiving threats and extortion attempts, and the area has a territorial conflict by illegal loggers and avocado agribusiness. Seven months later, the investigation continues, and there is no more information from the investigation of his death. Raul Hernandez was guide of tourists and forest ranger of the same reservation. We don't know much about him, but the only thing we know is that he was founded in the El Rosario Reserve with signs of torture. He was a co-worker of Homero Gomez for very long years. Michoacán is a state that has been in the bloody war of drugs, started in the presidential term of Felipe Calderón Hinojosa, and which during these 14 years has caused more than 250,000 deaths, in addition to the exponential increase in violence against environmental defenders and original communities dedicated to conservation of ecosystems. Despite the work of protecting the forests in which Homero Gomez was an important actor, because for decades this state has been an increase in deforestation due to clandestine logging and the advance of large avocado plantation, which is violently devastate the native part of Michoacán. In addition to this, it should be noted that since the approval of structural reforms in 2013, the progress of the large infrastructure projects has been accelerated throughout the country, which has triggered more and more conflict between companies and devastate the environment and how those who they are dedicated to this conservation. Illegal logging is an activity linked to very high acts of violence. In Mexico, native communities have been denounced for many years the problem of illegal logging, which is an activity that, in addition to generating enormous profits, is one of the main reasons for deforestation in Mexico. At least 70% of the wood sold in the country has been as an illegal origin. And evaluation of world forest resources for the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the deforestation rate in Mexico is 155,000 hectares per year, of which 60,000 has been in the origin in the clandestine logging. At a legal level, illegal logging is not a federal crime in our country, so it enjoys some impunity. In Mexico, criminals are very close to the authorities and business. This is one of the reasons for most of the attacks and killing of the environmental activists go unpunished. Violence against people who are dedicated to defend nature has been increasing in the last 10 years as a result of the advances of extractive policies such as mega mining, agribusiness, and infrastructure projects. In fact, more than 800 conflicts related to the defense of environment have been registered, such as as the defense of the rivers, the fight against fracking, or indigenous communities that project forests from the bands of extensive livestock and agriculture. In the last 8 years, there had been at least 19 murders of activists that at least 500 attacks ranging from extortion, threats, and torture and cyberbullying. The fact that the President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador government has promised in campaigns to protect and respect nature. 2 years of his government, at least 20 environmental defenders had been killed. On the other hand, he has referred in several occasions when those who defend nature, such as radicals or conservative opponents. Only this year, 7 environmentalists were killed, and five of them during the COVID-19 pandemic. Defense of the environment in Mexico is high-risky activity. Recently, international human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch and International Amnesty had been rated as the country as the 4th most dangerous for the defense of nature. However, the activists will continue to protect and respect nature.
For me personally, as a Congolese first, I really treasure what we have been given, what we have in Congo. Nature, rainforest, the biodiversity, the flora, such an amazing and such a beautiful gift from above that we have been given. And I believe, first of all, this is very unique because first, this is the oldest national park in Africa, the Virunga National Park. We have it in Congo. The Virunga National Park is considered as a jewel of the continent. It lies in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo and was established in 1925. The flora in the Virunga National Park is amazing, with almost 85% of animals that don't exist in any other parks in Africa. The second one is Nyiragongo, the Nyiragongo volcano. It's a huge attraction and a huge also blessing for people to come and see. The Nyiragongo is the biggest lava lake in the world. So, and is situated there in the Virunga National Park. So, when you talk about uniqueness, already we can see that this already builds some kind of unique environment that we have. And then also we have thirdly we have the mountain gorillas, the last deposit of mountain gorillas, which in a Virunga National Park, they live in their natural habitat. Because of the war and because of poverty, the livelihood of these gorillas are in danger. The first time I visited Virunga, I was also shocked to see the beauty, to see the nature. I was lost in it and couldn't believe that was existing in my own country, my next door. Because of that, I said, man, I need to fight for this. I need to tell the whole world that this does exist in Congo. When you look at ranges in other countries, you know, they're very different to the ranges that you found in Congo, and that is due to the kind of danger that they are exposed to in Virunga National Park. If you know, since 1994, when the FDLR, which was a rebel movement that came from Rwanda, and since they came to Congo in 1994, the collision between armed rebels and the Rangers started. We have local negative arms group of Congolese. We have the poachers challenging the livelihood of the park. The Virunga National Park is surrounded by a poor population. And because of poverty and because of 2 decades of wars, many militia groups were formed from this population. Because of poverty, they don't have anything to eat, they don't have jobs. So the only thing they can do is, to start, some of them start poaching, others using resources within a park, logging trees and selling wood to multinational companies. There was a wall electrocuted fence which was introduced to actually prevent local population from going into the parks. So this also created some kind of confusion for the population because they were not sure why they will be prevented from entering the parks and stuff, so that they see the rangers in the park, in the national park, as the enemies. What has happened this year, 24th of April, when the Rangers were traveling from Rumangabo to Goma. They were ambushed by rebels or militias or who knows who, and many people were killed in the mix. Rangers and just guys that work for the national people that I even knew myself that were killed in that attack. Now, people they still don't know what was the motive of this attack, and the government still probably not have investigated or even offered help to those who were affected. One thing I can say is that once there is trouble or some kind of killing or attack in the Virunga National Park, that really creates a very bad image for the national parks around it. No tourists, no one wants to visit those national parks. So the choice remains with visiting either Rwanda or Uganda national parks. And it is, in fact, part of the battles that we're fighting. As I was talking to my friend, he told me one thing which I also understood, that all these militias, they're not actually after tourists. They are after the rangers, the locals, because they are the ones who are attacking them, who are preventing them from getting animals or poaching or logging the trees, all these kind of abuses that is happening in the park. Congo is very hospitable to foreigners. They love foreigners, and it is very sad that these rangers have to suffer the consequences. They're giving their lives every day, protecting the livelihood of Virunga National Park. And the 24th of April, unfortunately, many of them lost their lives. And nobody knows exactly who was behind that. The biggest problem is that the government, the Congolese government, doesn't really care so much. If the government was very, very involved in taking care of the people or in establishing rules to say, if you are caught poaching, if you are caught, cutting trees or selling stuff, you will be taken to prison in Kinshasa. But the government doesn't care because some members of the government are benefiting from what is happening. The previous government, people don't trust so much this government. And people are hoping that this next government, which is in place now, will be a bit different. But as far as I know right now, people, they're not seeing so much change right now. cannot say that I know so much about Soko, but as far as I heard from friends that are working there and people that know a little bit about the situation, this is a company which has given a lot of money to the government. The government doesn't care about the environment, whether they spoil the environment, whether livelihoods of the animals living in a national park. They really don't care. All they care about is how can we get our money, put them in our pocket, and then we okay. And I think Virunga National Park did fight a lot in order to prevent that contract from happening. And because of that, many of them have been killed. You know, their lives are in danger because all these greedy government officials, you know, they really just want to get to that deal. And what I can say with a lot of multinational companies, they really don't care about Congolese. They don't care about the national park. They care about getting their money and getting out of Congo, whether they spoil everything there. Many of these companies don't care about the environment either. You know, they will pretend as if we care about it, but really, they don't care anything about that. From what I heard, the Soko deal, it hasn't happened yet, but no one knows if it's going to be happening in the coming years or coming months. Most importantly, I think if anything needs to be done, it has to include the local population, educating them about why this is important to our generation today. You know, and I think that is not being done in a strong way, in a way that it really educates the entire population. Now, slowly, people start realizing that there is something important there, not only for us as Congolese. It is important for the whole humanity. It does concern all of us, and we also all be involved in what is happening and create a greater awareness. The first solution will be creating employment for the citizens, and most importantly for the people living around the parks, maybe creating platforms where you can educate the population. And so the second one will be to educate the children. And most importantly, supporting organizations that are educating children about the resources that we have. And there is an organization called Congo Tourism Gate, and what they do is when they take the tourists, they take them to the locals as well, and they show them what is happening. So they're sponsoring education, and they're taking these children to the national park to teach them about gorillas, to teach them about different animals, to teach them about how this is important for them. And you have these kids now, when their father say, I'm going to poach, these children are telling the parents, no, don't do that, because gorilla deserve to live. Gorilla is important to our life. This is amazing because my friends are doing this. And when I think about it, it just gives me a lot of joy to know that we can actually educate children to grow knowing that I will protect the national park. I'll be part of making a change in my community. I'll be part of teaching those who don't know what does this mean to us. Now, being able to sponsor such organization and say, we want to make this big, we want to put it all over the country where we have issues. And I think we will see a generation rising saying that we are part of this greater movement. And I think that will make a big change. The third one will be to say, now here is our rules. Anyone who will be caught, poaching or killing animals or, doing all these bad things will be taken to prison in whatever thing. Like, the government is really serious, and people will know that our government is serious. Now, what do you see now? They will catch someone who's poaching. The Virunga rangers they're not allowed to keep these poachers by themselves. They will catch someone, send them to the prison, local prison, and then 2 weeks, a month after this person is released. So there is no consequences for those who are doing that. And the government is showing an example that we don't care. You know, we can let these people do whatever they want to do. We will never stop speaking about what is going wrong, and if there is someone who wants to ruin our future or the livelihood, our animals, or spoil our environments or misuse our resources, we're going to be talking about it until everyone hears about it. There is hope in Congo, even though the world and the major media outlet of the world might say that Congo there is no hope, but us as Congolese, we know there is hope because we were born there. We lived the war, and we can see that we came out of that, and we believe that there is hope for those who are in Congo.
That's the end of the first part of our project. The second part will be released soon, and I would like to express my gratitude to all people who shared their stories with us today. Thank you for not being afraid. Please find them on Instagram and follow the situation in their countries. Let's remember, environmental protection is not a crime. No one must be killed or jailed.